Hello students, let's do one more question with factoring. So the first thing that we do is we're going to write down the standard form, which is actually right below the problem. I'm going to say ax squared plus bx plus c. And remember, the whole idea for this is to help us identify our a value, b, and c. So if you compare both trinomials over here, we're gonna see that the value for a is, and I know what you're saying, there's no number. Remember, again, if there's no number, we always put a 1. So that's my 1, which becomes my a. B is a -6, and c is a -16. Once I do that, I am going to use the same method that I've been using for the other questions, which is the x method. So let me go ahead and draw an x, and you do the same thing. Okay, so I hope that you have your x and your t ready for me. So now we're going to go ahead and continue with the problem. So the first thing I want to know is, let's see if you remember who goes up here. And I hope that you remember that, yes, it is going to be a times c. So in this case, my answer will be a -16. Opposite to that, it will be b. You're right. Okay, so b has a value of -6, which I'm going to write down right now. Now, on the lower left and right side, we're going to write down the coefficient, which is still a. And in this case, it's a 1. And I know what you're thinking, Miss, every time that I've been doing questions lately, it's been a 1. Is that going to be all the time? Of course not. We'll do some more examples in a minute where the coefficient will not be a 1. But for right now, let's finish this one. So now I'm going to take a look at my t. Because remember, in my t, I'm doing the process of finding the product for my factors needs to be a -16. Okay, so I'm going to write down product right here. I also need to find the sum for those two factors, right? But now my answer needs to be a -6. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with the factors that will give me a -16. So if you think about, don't think about positive and negatives, right? Let's think about just numbers. So I'm thinking that you are going to start with a 1 and a 16. But I want you to think of something. If my answer is negative, I need to know then that one of these two factors needs to be a negative. So I'm going to start by placing the negative to the 1. So this will still give me a -16, right? But I want you to go back and reflect on that, because now, what if the 16 was negative? Well, that will still give me a -16, right? So in the first case, the first factor is negative. In the second case, the second number, it's my negative number, right? So we gotta work with both. So now I'm gonna do the sum. So don't forget that the 1 is negative, and I'm gonna add that to a 16. That gives me a +15, if you remember. Next one is a +1, still plus because it's a sum, but it's a -16. So I do get a -15. Okay, so now I'm going to think about 2. Can I find a factor that multiplied by 2 gives me a 16? So I hope you think about 2 and 8. But since I wanted negative, I'm going to assume that the 2 is negative, which gives me a -16. But again, what if 8 was negative? Well, that's good, because I will still get a -16. Don't forget to always give me both cases, because that can make a difference when we're looking for the sum of those numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and start with -2 plus 8. That gives me a +6. Yes. Then I'm going to add up 2 plus a -8, and this gives me a negative 6. So if you notice, this is the one that I wanted to find, right? Because negative 6 is what I actually needed as an answer, right? If you can go on and say, Miss, but how do I know that I'm supposed to start with the factors? Well, I'm going to give you a clue on that. After 2 comes 3, right? 3 times who gives you a negative 16? Not a whole number, right? So let's skip that. What about 4? Well, 4 times 4 gives me 16, right? But I know one of them needs to be negative. So I do get a negative 16. Now, look at these two numbers here. How do I know that I finished with my factors when these two numbers are so close to each other that there will be nothing else that I can find another factors for? That's like a clue. So if you do this one, negative 4 plus a positive 4, we get a 0. So yeah, I can see that my answer should be a negative 6 and a negative 16. Okay, so let me underline those because those are the answers that I was looking for. Okay, so let me write down the factors now. So my factors are going to come and I'm going to take the place right here. Okay, very important that I write them down. So over here, I'm going to write down 2 and negative 8, just as I use them on the left, on the right. So remember that this is the one that carries the x. This is the one that carries the x. So now I'm going to think about these two sections over here. Because remember, these are the ones that I will be using for my factors. Okay? So now with that in mind, let's write down the two factors that I found. So I got 1x plus 2, and the other one is 1x. Since this is a negative 8, we are going to place a minus 8 in there, which actually I can rewrite it as x plus 2 and x minus 8. Okay, so this is what I said. So these are my factors. And yes, you're right. These are the factors. Okay, so technically this will be the answer that they were looking for, right? So I know what you're saying now. Miss, what do I need the left side? It says product. Remember, product makes multiplication. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to prove, and I call it check also. I'm going to check that my two factors that I found, which are x plus 2 and x minus 8, will actually give me x squared minus 6x minus 16. So what I'm going to do next, if you remember, we're going to do the box method to multiply. So let's go ahead and draw a box. I'll give you a couple of seconds for you guys to do that, and I'm going to do it myself. Okay, so let's go ahead and check our factors. So let's start with my factors over here. So this will be x and 2. This will be x. And this one, it's technically a negative 8. So make sure that you guys remember that. You multiply, and I'm going to get x squared. 2 times x gives me 2x. Negative 8 times x gives me negative 8x. And 2 times negative 8 gives me negative 16, right? So what we're going to do next is we're going to rewrite all my answers from the boxes. Okay? Now, right here, I want you to pay attention to this, right? This is a negative 8x. Make sure that you bring the symbol with it. This is a negative 16. Make sure you bring the symbol with it. Okay? So what we're going to do next is we're going to combine like terms. So combining like terms, I hope that you remember, it means who are the ones that I can kind of combine together because of the variables. So my x squared cannot be combined with anything. So I'm going to bring it down as x squared. Now what happens here, it's a negative 8 and a positive 2. So if you remember, this will give me a negative 6. So I'm going to write down as minus 6x and minus 16. So if you look at this here and you look at the original problem, that actually matches exactly the same. So that's how I check that my factors are correct.